So first of all, it was Naughty Boy and Beyonce and Running playing at GTFM. Then we had some EMF and Unbelievable. And it was Del Mitri for the second time this morning. All hail Blind Love, 11:15 on this Wednesday morning. And it's time now to introduce my second guest on the show today. He's been international senior media executive, involved with lots of different things, I have to say, including being one of the bosses, I guess, on national radio. First of all, let's say good morning to Paul Robertson. Good morning, Paul. I think he's there somewhere. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Gareth. Good morning.
There we are. You see, technology. Don't you just love it?
That's quite a build-up you gave me there. I hope I can live up to the expectation.
Oh, I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. Now, before we chat about your long career, Paul, tell us a bit really where you're from and a little bit about your early years.
Well, I'm from London, and I spent the first few years at school in London and went off to university, and then I was desperate to get into radio, which took me to the northeast of England. So I had no idea about what it was like in the northeast. I went up to live in Sunderland for a while, had this flat right by Roker Park, which was then Sunderland's ground, and it was freezing. It was so cold you had to get dressed to go to bed.
Oh, I've been there and done that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a real shock for a southern boy. So I mean, I've been very lucky, and I've worked all over the UK and had great times. But no, I'm from London, and I've lived in London really all my life. And even though I've travelled a lot, around the world, I've been very lucky to travel to 90 plus countries over the last few years. I've always come back to London, come back to the UK, and I do love the UK.
Now, when I was a child, Paul, great memories, including listening to the old BBC Light programme, which you may remember, the Home Service, which became Radio 4, the third programme. Some of the iconic shows that I can remember include Two-Way Family Favourites with Jean Metcalfe, Children's Favourites with Uncle Mac, and Saturday Club with Brian Matthews. Can you remember some of those shows yourself?
I can. I do remember listening with Mother and being, sort of obliged by my mum to listen with Mother, and it was fine. But it was funny. I used to listen to Brian Matthew on Saturday Club, and I'm a huge fan of Brian Matthew. I think Brian Matthew's great, but there was something about it which was very sort of prim and proper, very BBC, quite formal, and it was all very safe. And really, for me, the excitement came with Radio Luxembourg. I was listening to Radio Luxembourg at 208 meters, coming in and out and fading and sounding terrible. But, you continually retuning the dial, hoping to get a better signal. You never really do. But somehow those DJs and then the pirate radio DJs, they were the ones I really associated with. I guess I'm sort of, I'm a sensible person, but I was a bit of a rebel, and I like the sort of rebellion that went with the pirates and went with Luxembourg. And for me, the light program was a little bit too safe. When Radio 1 came along in September 1967, and obviously Radio 2, 3 and 4, that was a lot better. But for me, what really woke me up to wanting to be in this business was commercial radio starting in the UK. So I liked Radio 1 in the early days, in the late 60s, early 70s, but never really loved it.
Right, okay. So with Luxembourg then, they would have been the days with Tony Prince and Bob Stewart, I'm guessing?
Yeah, that's right. Mark Wesley, obviously you had people like Kid Jensen passing through there, Noel Edmonds passed through there. Bob Stewart, now he was a voice, wasn't he?
Oh, brilliant.
George, amazing voice. I wanted to be like Bob Stewart, but never could. And then Tony Prince, who I don't quite know about Tony Prince, and obviously Tony Prince is still around. I mean, what an enthusiast. I thought, is he really royal? Is he royal? And then Emperor Roscoe got me confused too. I thought, how do these guys get these titles? And then, of course, you realise it's all part of the stage makeup and part of the magic you create on the radio.
Absolutely. I met Roscoe in 1976, and of course he's a huge star, massive star. Of course, his dad, Joe Pasternak, a very famous Hollywood film producer, of course. And of course, I thought, I'm going to be lucky if I get 30 seconds with this guy. He was leaving a gig in Mountain Ash in January 76. We spent the best part of half an hour talking about radio, and I learned more from that half an hour than I think I have since.
But you know what? Some of those big names are the most generous with their time. I remember, for me, it was Alan Freeman. And then, you may know, and many of your listeners may know.
Not off.
Not off pop pickers. I mean, he was just gorgeous. I mean, he was so generous with his time, and Fluff was a total pro. I mean, you know this as a radio presenter. It's as much about the preparation that you do as actually presenting the show, and doing the prep is essential. Doing all the work, and particularly making sure you're local. I mean, for you, it's obviously critical that you're reflecting the region that you're in, and that prep is important. And I think people underestimate that sometimes. But Fluff, my goodness me, after all these years of success, he was still in the office doing his prep, doing his homework, in the studio, rehearsing, checking everything works. Because if you remember, Fluff used to have those bits of classical music he used to play between the pop songs on Pick of the Pops. And, he very rarely made a mistake. And I said, Fluff, it's very complicated with all these carts and all these different things you're trying to do. And he said, well, Lois, I rehearse. And then I rehearse again, and then I rehearse again. And he literally did. And that was why he was such a pro. And I thought, A, he was generous with his time, but B, it taught me a very, very valuable lesson.
Yeah, and of course, the very first host of the Radio 1 Roadshow. So Johnny Beelan certainly had a lot of faith in him, Paul, didn't he?
He did, and rightly so. And I mean, Johnny Beerling is someone who had a lot of faith in me, because Johnny Beerling's the guy who gave me the job at Radio 1. And, Johnny was, in my opinion, the best ever controller of Radio 1. And I'm personally in his debt for giving me the chance. I came from commercial radio, and he put me in charge of daytime and the music on Radio 1. It was, wow, what a job that was, for someone who's in their late 20s. I was very lucky, but it's thanks to Johnny I got that break.
Not so much luck, it's because of talent, Paul, I'm guessing. Now, were you responsible then? Who were the jocks there when you were head of Radio 1?
Well, the lineup then was Simon Mayo doing the breakfast show, and there's another professional, fantastic broadcaster, Simon Mayo, and obviously now doing Greatest Hits Radio. Great broadcaster, but just a nice guy, and again, just wonderful to work with. Simon Bates did 9 till 12 with Our Tune and the Golden Hour. Of course, Simon was an interesting character. I mean, very bright, very intelligent, massively into current affairs, and Simon was someone you had to form a relationship with, and I think he and I did, and we got on very well. Not everybody did. Simon was a bit Marmite for some people, but wow, what a successful broadcaster. And in those days, Our Tune was the most listened to feature on radio anywhere in the UK. It was the top time, Our Tune, 11 o'clock. Then Gary Davis did lunchtime. Gary, great on the road, great on road shows. He was a really nice guy to work with. Steve Wright doing the afternoon show, and I remember being invited by Steve to come and be part of the Afternoon Boys and doing those recordings with him, which I absolutely treasured. Although I was technically Steve's boss, that was how I got to influence Steve, by being in the studio with the Afternoon Boys and doing the odd voice, and that was amazing. And then we had Mark Goodyear, Nicky Campbell, John Peel, and then the weekends it was Bruno Brooks, David Lee Travis, Alan Freeman, Philip Schofield, Bruno doing the top 40, I think, Annie Nightingale, all those people. Great lineup. Great.
That's a great team you were in charge of. So what was your actual role then, Paul?
Well, I was basically in charge of all of it. I was in charge of all of the output for those shows. So the content, the DJs, the music, the promotions, everything went out in those daytime hours was down to me. And then the other thing was the playlist. And the playlist was an amazing thing. It was a committee, effectively, where all the producers were invited to come along. And it was a 3-4 hour meeting held in the basement. So if you go down Egton House, which is the building where Radio 1 used to be, now it's all been subsumed into the extensions of Broadcasting House in London. But there's a corridor, and it goes underneath the road, near the tube line, and then comes back up in Broadcasting House. And there's this sort of labyrinth of conference rooms. And we used to go into conference room B12, which was in the basement, and you could actually hear the trains as they went through the track. But it didn't matter. And in there, you sat there, and I had a gramophone player. It was obviously vinyl in those days, and then became CD later. And the producers, one by one, would be invited to pitch a record. So I would go to producer A, and they'd say, I want to pitch this record. And so we'd play it and listen to it, and then we'd discuss it around the room. DJs would come and go. They weren't always the same DJs, but different DJs would come into the meeting, disappear. And then you go around the room and keep playing all these new records until you decided, which ones you thought were shortlisted. And then you have a debate about which ones were going to come off the playlist that week and which were going to go on. And then the playlist was delivered to Egton House reception as a piece of physical paper. They printed out about 200 copies. I mean, not very green or, eco-friendly, but that's what we did. And it was like being a rock star when my assistant, Alison, went down to deliver the playlist. All the pluggers, all the headsets, at music. All the MDs of the record labels were there waiting to see if their record had made it onto the Radio 1 playlist. And I knew in the afternoon it was a time to disappear, because that's when the MDs of the labels would say, Paul, you haven't put our record on, or why have you not put this one on? Because you knew that was when they were thinking, why did that one not make it? So in the afternoon I was usually busy on the phone trying to explain why certain songs had not made it that particular week onto the playlist.
So you probably crossed paths with Matthew Bannister. Of course, I mean, in his day, he was a little bit controversial as well, Paul, wasn't he, Matthew?
Well, I worked for Johnny and for Matthew. So when Johnny left, I applied for the job of controller at Radio 1, as did lots of other people, but didn't get the job. Matthew got the job and he made me his number two. So I was sort of the number two. I was the managing editor of Radio 1 at this point, and they expanded it. So I was in charge of every program, the entire output, and all the marketing and all the promotion and the brand. So the job got bigger. So, you know, most of the operational stuff under Matthew was with me. Matthew was doing a job, you know, at the time, it's forgotten that there was a huge pressure by the commercial radio lobby to privatize Radio 1 and privatize Radio 2. And the argument was that commercial radio is meeting those needs. There is no need for Radio 1 and Radio 2. And one of the problems we have with Radio 1 is it's actually very, very popular. I mean, it had 19 million listeners. We had about 25% of all radio listening in the UK was to Radio 1. And the commercial stations were saying, we can't make money, you know, you're taking our audience, blah, 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 blah. So what Matthew was charged with by the Director General, then John Burt, was making Radio 1 more public service, making it more distinctive, doing things commercial radio didn't do. Good argument, and rightly so, because it's public money, so you should be doing public good. The issue was he went a bit too far. He took the brief a bit too far. Brief, absolutely right. Strategy, absolutely right. Execution, terrible, and at times brutal. And Matthew and I didn't agree about everything. I mean, there were certain things that he wanted to do I managed to stop him doing. Other things I couldn't stop him doing. So Matthew and I had an interesting relationship. I respect him, but I don't always agree with what he did.
Right, fair point. So you were also in charge of Talk Radio for a time, and you sort of turned it around. Of course, people know it today, Paul, very much as TalkSPORT and TalkSPORT 2, but they were failing a little bit. Then you came in and turned the fortunes around.
Well, they were failing quite a lot, actually. I mean, it was a difficult decision. I'd been at the BBC for 7-8 years. I became head of strategy afterwards, and we did a number of things, which was repositioning Radio 2, working with Jim Moyer, the controller, getting Steve Wright and Jonathan Ross on at weekends. That was the key thing we did to get Radio 2 younger, because Radio 2 was getting older and older and older, and its audience was literally dying off. Did some work on Radio 3. We had to make Radio 4 and Radio 5 complementary, because Radio 5 and Radio 4 were starting to bump into each other and sound a bit too like each other. So having done all of that, it sort of felt like job done. So a headhunter called me and said, would you like to become managing director of your own station? And by the way, we're going to double your salary. And so you've got to have that conversation, haven't you?
Absolutely, yes.
And I went in and I realised talk radio was an absolute mess. I mean, here's one example. It was costing us about £1 million a month to run this radio station. £1 million a month was the total cost of the station. The revenue was £80,000 a month. So
something had to change.
Yeah, I mean, you might as well have been throwing pound notes out of the window. Pound coins out the window. So we had to change. So part of the problem was that this shock jock thing was going on. You know, the idea was you're going to be shocking. You had Caesar the Geezer and these people on, and the idea was to be shocking and basically, you know, say outrageous things. And what was interesting about that was, A, the audience didn't really want it, so the listening figures were very, very low. But crucially, advertisers didn't want to be in that environment. They didn't want their brands around that sort of content. So what we did was reposition it to a sort of middle market. And having done all this work on Radio 4 and Radio 5, I knew where the gap in the market was, because I knew what Radio 4 were doing and I knew what Radio 5 Live were doing, because I'd basically set the strategy. So what we did was position it as being a sort of a middle market, a Daily Mirror, Daily Express, Daily Mail sort of station, not the Guardian, not the Telegraph, but not the Sun, and make it intelligent but down-to-earth debate. We brought in people like Anna Rayburn and Lorraine Kelly. Chris Evans joined because he just had a row. Danny Baker joined. And we had some great talent on there, Tommy Boyd, Mike Allen, and the audience went up, and so that was good. But also the advertisers recognised that it was now a place they were happy to have their advertising, and so the revenue went up, and we got it to just about to break even. I didn't make much profit from it. We got it to break even, and then having got it to break even, the owners decided to sell it, and they bought it for £1, and they sold it for about 27 million. So I suppose they did quite okay out of that.
Yeah, because when I was involved in another station that was owned by the Wireless Group, Kelvin McKenzie, of course, was involved with that. And of course, I think these days it's owned by UTV, Paul, isn't it? TalkSPORT?
Yeah, exactly. So what happened was Kelvin McKenzie he replaced me effectively. Kelvin walked in, so I walked out the door, and then Kelvin walked in half an hour later, and he wanted it like that. He wanted a bit of theatrical, but that's Kelvin. Kelvin and I had a lunch actually, and I can't really describe the conversation because every other word was blue. But we had a lunch before he closed the deal. He bought it with Liberty Media. That was his partner, an American partner. And he told me how he wanted to run the station and what he wanted to do. And we sort of agreed at the lunch. It was a great lunch, but we weren't going to work together. And so I said, I will leave and you can take over. And so that's what happened. And Kelvin took over, and that became the Wireless Group. And now it's part of UTV Radio. And of course, now a digital station. TalkSPORT is the analog station, to Talk Radio back as a digital station. And it was an exciting time. I mean, it was a turnaround. It was a challenging time. We were managing, cash flow. It was, I had to keep the radio station running, but at the same time, we were running very short of money. And so it was, in terms of management, it really taught me a huge amount.
Now, of course, you began your broadcasting career on commercial radio. It's all changed now. Of course, you've got the bigger groups have taken over. They network a lot of the daytime shows now, Paul, don't they? Community radio like GTFM ourselves have kind of replaced ILR stations, I guess, and that's got to be a good thing.
I think so. Look, GTFM, in Pontypridd and the area, you're the local station. You're the go-to now. You're the guys who are local to your region. You understand, Pontypridd and the region. You live there, you work there, and you're doing what I used to do, which was play great music, have good presenters, have people who engage with the community, but talk about local. I mean, talking about local is absolutely essential. You must be local, and that's the key to it. And that's what commercial radio was when I started, Radio Tees and then Mercia Sound. We had massive audience. I mean, I used to joke once, I was legendary in Coventry, unknown everywhere else. Walk into a pub in Coventry and not get bought a free drink. I mean, we had 60% reach. So that means 6 out of 10 people in that region listened to the station. I mean, we were the number one station in that market by miles. I was on local telly, I was doing newspapers, I was doing nightclubs. I really was, a local celebrity because that station was just embedded in the community. And I think for GTFM and all the other community stations, if you can embed yourself in your community, there's a huge success there and a huge demand for that sort of radio. It hasn't gone away. It just is that commercial radio stopped doing it, but community radio has taken up that mantle. And, I wish you every success at GTFM. Keep doing what you're doing. And if you're part of your community, you'll be very, very successful for a long time.
Thanks very much, Paul. We'll keep that in mind. DAB is the way forward now, isn't it? A lot different in terms of quality to the days when Radio 1 broadcast in 247 metres. Now we're going back, Paul, aren't we?
We are. Well, DAB, I did the very first forecast for DAB for the BBC. This was in 1996. I was asked by the Director General to forecast how DAB take-up would take place because they were putting together a case for investing in transmitters because no one wanted to invest in DAB. The commercial radio stations didn't want to have DAB transmitters. They saw it as extra cost. They saw FM and AM as being totally fine. And so the BBC had to kickstart it, and that meant the BBC had to put capital into investing in transmitters. The BBC doesn't really have any capital. It has operating income from the license fee. So we had to make the case. So I did the DAB forecasts. I got them hopelessly wrong, of course, far too optimistic. But DAB is the replacement for broadcast, for one-to-many, which is a very efficient way of broadcasting. You're on FM 107.9. That means everyone can listen to you on 107.9. Whereas if you're on it online, online's great. But of course, every time you have another online listener, there's more cost there because it's more bandwidth. So the scalability, if you like, of FM or DAB is important. So DAB is the broadcast future. I think we're going to see a more complicated future now because in the past, It used to be a world where here's your radio and you had your tranny on the windowsill in the kitchen, and you'd listen to that, and you have your tranny in the bathroom, and maybe you'd have your music center, or if you were very posh, your hi-fi with your separates, your separate amp and your separate tuner sitting in the living room with your turntable. Those days have gone. Now people are listening on apps, listening on mobile phones. So it has changed, but DAB is definitely something that's growing. And in fact, it's interesting now that if you look at the digital listening, DAB listening is the single largest component of listening in the UK. And DAB has sort of finally, I think, found its way. And it's all been part, I think, of digital becoming cool. When Sky started, no one wanted Sky. Who wants a satellite dish in there on their house? What a horrible thing that is. Now having digital is cool. But it wasn't. And so I think digital radio and DAB has benefited from digital now being, everyone talks about digital, doesn't it? You even have people with digital in their job titles.
So what is Paul Robinson up to now then, Paul, just before you go?
Well, I'm currently drinking a cup of coffee. I'm doing a lot of training at the moment. We're doing a lot of training for the government, training medium-sized companies, media companies, how to grow as we come out of the pandemic. And obviously Wales is coming out of this too. There's still a number of cases, but the world's getting back to normal, including Wales getting back to normal, thank goodness. How can they grow? So it could be a podcast company. It could be someone doing outdoor theatre. It could be street graffiti. It could be someone doing design work, working with those companies. We do quite a lot of animation, and we do some straight consultancy work, and I do the odd little bit of radio now and again. But the radio is the thing I still love the most. There's something special about as you are now, sitting there with a microphone, talking to lots of people, and there's something about it. And I can't quite define it, because in a way it's madness, isn't it? Sitting in a room talking to a microphone. But I know you love it, and if you do love it, it comes across, I think.
Paul Robinson, with probably the best CV in British radio. It's been an absolute pleasure, Paul. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on GTFM today. Stay safe, my friend, and keep up the great work.
Thank you very much, and good luck to everyone at GTFM, and keep listening to 107.9 FM.
There we are. Done my job for me. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
GTFM Community Message.